welcome back to Mr. Sleepy Crime. I know many of you enjoy listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this story involves real people and real tragedies. We tell these stories not for entertainment, but to remember the victims and perhaps help others recognize the warning signs that could prevent similar tragedies. For the best experience, feel free to lower the volume a little, just enough to let the story gently carry you off to sleep. Alright, please get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's first story. Tonight we'll explore a case that shocked the quiet streets of Dallas, Texas. This is the story of Jamie Faith, a man loved by many whose life was stolen on a peaceful October morning. But as investigators would discover, the most dangerous threat didn't come from a stranger in the shadows. It came from within his own home. This is a story about deception, manipulation, and a love that turned deadly. October 9th, 2020. Dawn was just beginning to break over the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, Texas. It was a Friday morning, crisp and quiet, the kind that promised an ordinary day ahead. Jamie Faith, a 49-year-old American Airlines technology director, was preparing for his morning routine, a simple walk with his wife Jennifer and their beloved dog Maggie. Jamie was the kind of man people genuinely liked. His colleagues at American Airlines remembered him as funny, warm, always ready with a joke to break the tension in a quiet meeting room. He loved travel, good food, and the Green Bay Packers. His friends described him as down-to-earth, the type who didn't take himself too seriously. He had worked hard to build a comfortable life, and at 49 he seemed to have it all. A loving wife, a stable career, and the simple pleasure of morning morns with his dog. The day before, October 8th, Jamie and Jennifer had celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of shared memories, inside jokes, and the comfortable rhythm that comes with building a life together. That evening they had marked the occasion quietly, perhaps with dinner, perhaps just with the acknowledgement that they'd made it this far together. Now as Friday morning light filtered through their Oak Cliff home, Jamie clipped Maggie's leash and headed toward the door with Jennifer at his side. The security camera at their front door captured them leaving. Jamie in the foreground, Jennifer behind him, the dog pulling slightly ahead with that eager energy dogs have for morning walks. 1 minute, that's all the time that passed between leaving their front door and the moment their lives changed forever. From the shadows of a neighbor's property, a figure emerged, masked, hooded, moving with purpose. The figure raised a gun and fired, once, twice, 3 times, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Jamie Faith collapsed in the street just steps from his own front door. The quiet morning exploded with chaos. Dogs began barking throughout the neighborhood. The sounds of gunshots echoed off the houses. Neighbors began emerging from their homes. Confused, terrified, Emery Wilson, who lived nearby, heard the commotion and stepped outside. He walked to the end of his walkway and saw what looked like feet, a body lying in the street. As he started running toward the scene to help, he saw the killer masked, hooded, and holding a gun. Wilson immediately ran back inside his house to retrieve his own weapon. But by the time he returned, the shooter was gone. Jennifer Faith was on the ground, her wrists bound with duct tape, screaming hysterically. The shooter had attempted to steal her rings, wrestling with her hands before fleeing. The sound of her screaming was captured on a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera. Raw, visceral cries that seemed to tear through the morning air. The killer ran to a black Nissan Titan pickup truck with a distinctive T decal on the rear window. The truck's engine roared to life and the vehicle sped away from the scene, captured by multiple doorbell cameras in the neighborhood. Jamie Faith never stood a chance. The medical examiner would later confirm that he had been shot 7 times, 3 bullets to the head, 3 to the chest and 1 to the groin. The shots to his head would have killed him almost instantly. At 49 years old, he had been a healthy man. Now he lay dead in the street, his wedding ring torn from his finger, his dog's leash still nearby. Within minutes, Oak Cliff was swarming with police. Dallas homicide detectives Chris Walton and Eric Barnes arrived at the scene to find Jennifer Faith still hysterical, still bearing the duct tape marks on her wrists. She was immediately taken in for questioning, and what she told detectives painted a picture of a terrifying random attack. Through tears and sobs, Jennifer described the morning. She and Jamie had just left their home, she said. They were barely a minute into their walk when a person appeared and started shooting. I turned around and I just saw this person shoot and shoot, she told Detective Walton, her voice breaking. I couldn't believe I didn't know him. Like, why? A lot of shots, 5, 6, maybe. I feel like... And he just kept going and I'm like, stop it, she continued, describing how the shooter had turned toward her after killing her husband. And then I saw the person turn and like just dark eyes coming toward me. And so I yelled no, and I started to run. And he tackled me to the ground. He was trying to attack me the whole time I was screaming. It was a compelling performance. The audio of her screaming during the attack was chilling. The video footage of her crying hysterically afterwards seemed to capture a woman in the depths of trauma and grief. Even seasoned detectives who had seen countless crime scenes were moved by her apparent anguish. But the brutal manner of Jamie Faith's killing troubled investigators. This wasn't a typical robbery. 7 shots, 3 to the head, 3 to the chest, 1 to the groin. That was overkill. That was rage. That was personal. Robbers don't typically shoot someone 7 times and then take the time to duct tape the wife's hands. They grab what they can and run. Defense attorney Christy Jack, later asked to review the case, immediately recognized the pattern. As soon as I saw it, I thought, that's a hit, she said. The execution-style nature of the killing suggested this was planned, targeted, and personal. But who would want Jamie Faith dead? By all accounts, he was a well-liked man with no known enemies. His colleagues at American Airlines spoke highly of him. His friends described him as generous and kind. He didn't seem to have the kind of conflicts that led to murder. Investigators began to do what they always do in such cases. They looked closely at the spouse. Jennifer Faith, on the surface, seemed to be a devastated widow, but in murder investigations, appearances can be deceiving. Jennifer Faith threw herself into the role of grieving widow with remarkable energy. She organized not 1 but 2 funerals for Jamie, one in Dallas where they lived, and one in Phoenix where they had family ties. Both services were meticulously planned, elaborate affairs. Friends and neighbors who attended were struck by the attention to detail. There were custom matchbooks for people to take home, memorial cards, coasters with Jamie's photo. One friend, Teresa Jensen, later remarked that it was more elaborate than any other funeral she'd ever seen. It seemed like Jennifer was determined to honor her husband's memory in every possible way. But Jennifer wasn't just mourning, she was also campaigning. She appeared on WFAA, the local ABC affiliate, making an emotional plea to the public. Her voice trembling, she begged for information about the killer. The truck is absolutely critical, she said, tears streaming down her face. Somebody has got to know whose truck this is. It's a black Nissan Titan, extended cab. It had a Texas Ranger sticker in the back window. The community rallied around her. A neighbor, Jennifer Svalin, organized a GoFundMe campaign to help Jennifer with expenses. The donations poured in from friends, family, neighbors, and even strangers moved by her story. Nearly $60,000 was raised. People wanted to help this woman who had lost her husband so suddenly and violently. Jamie's friends mobilized to support Jennifer and her daughter Amber. Melissa Gonzalez and Shimona Jackson, neighbors who had known the Faiths, checked in on Jennifer regularly, bringing food, offering shoulders to cry on, doing whatever they could to ease her pain. But while Jennifer was performing grief for the cameras and for her community, detectives were methodically building a picture of her life. And that picture was beginning to look very different from the one she was presenting to the world. As part of standard procedure, detectives asked Jennifer if they could search her cell phone. She agreed. After all, she had nothing to hide, right? She was the victim here, the traumatized widow. But when investigators examined her phone, they noticed something odd. Jennifer had deleted vast amounts of data from her messages and emails. However, she had missed something. In a text message to a friend from April 2020, 6 months before Jamie's murder, Jennifer had mentioned reconnecting with an ex-boyfriend named Darren. Just a first name, but it was enough. Digging deeper into Jennifer's phone records, investigators found something Jennifer hadn't realized was there. Buried in her contacts and email metadata was a full name and address. Darren Ruben Lopez, Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee. Investigators immediately began looking into Darren Lopez. What they found was intriguing. Lopez was a 49-year-old Army Special Forces veteran. A Green Beret who had earned a Purple Heart. He had served multiple tours in Iraq, where he had suffered a traumatic brain injury from a roadside bomb that killed 19 soldiers in his unit. The injury had left him with lasting cognitive and psychological effects. Lopez was going through a divorce and living on a 20-acre property in rural Tennessee, raising his daughters in relative isolation. By all accounts, he was struggling, dealing with PTSD, dealing with his divorce, dealing with the lingering effects of his brain injury. But there was something else. Darren Lopez owned a black Nissan Titan pickup truck. Texas authorities reached out to their counterparts in Tennessee. They needed eyes on Lopez's property. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's aviation unit conducted aerial surveillance of Lopez's 20-acre spread, and there it was, captured from above, a black Nissan Titan with a distinctive T sticker on the rear window. It was the same make, model, and distinguishing feature as the truck that had been seen fleeing Jamie Faith's murder. With Lopez identified as a person of interest, investigators obtained warrants for his phone and financial records. What they discovered was staggering. Between May 2020 and January 2021, Jennifer Faith and Darren Lopez had been in contact more than 122,000 times. That worked out to an average of nearly 500 contacts per day. Texts, emails, calls, they were in constant communication, an obsessive level of connection that consumed their days and nights. The relationship had rekindled in early 2020, during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Lopez had reached out to Jennifer on LinkedIn, and they had begun exchanging messages. At first, the conversations were innocent, catching up on old times, sharing family photos, talking about their lives since high school. Darren Lopez and Jennifer Faith had dated in high school. They had gone to prom together. There were photos of them as teenagers, young and smiling, full of the kind of innocent romance that seems so uncomplicated in retrospect. After high school, they had gone their separate ways. Lopez had joined the military. Jennifer had built a life, eventually marrying Jamie Faith. But now, decades later, they were reconnecting. And the innocent catching up quickly turned into something else. Within days of that first LinkedIn message, Lopez was professing his love for Jennifer. Despite being married, despite Lopez going through his own divorce, they fell into an intense emotional affair. They talked constantly. They made plans for a future together. They engaged in explicit conversations, detailing fantasies and desires. To anyone looking at their messages, it was clear these two people were deeply obsessively involved with each other. But there was something else in those messages. Something darker. Starting in early summer 2020, Jennifer began telling Darren Lopez that her husband was abusing her. At first, the claims were relatively mild. Emotional abuse, controlling behavior. But as the weeks went on, the alleged abuse escalated dramatically. Jennifer told Lopez that Jamie was physically beating her. She sent him photos of bruises and injuries, claiming they were from Jamie's attacks. She told him about sexual abuse, then gang rape. The stories became more and more horrific, painting Jamie Faith as a monster capable of unspeakable violence. Lopez, living alone in rural Tennessee, dealing with PTSD and a traumatic brain injury, was devastated by these revelations. He repeatedly urged Jennifer to go to the police, to report the abuse, to get help, but Jennifer always had a reason why she couldn't. She told him she didn't want their daughter Amber to see her father arrested. She said she was afraid of what Jamie might do if she reported him. She said she needed to handle it carefully. At Jennifer's suggestion, Lopez should keep quiet and just be there for her emotionally. But Lopez wasn't just getting information from Jennifer. That's what made the manipulation so insidious. In April 2020, Jennifer created a fake email account using her husband's name. She began sending emails to Lopez, posing as Jamie Faith. These emails taunted Lopez, letting him know that Jamie was aware of the affair. The fake Jamie wrote about physically and sexually abusing Jennifer, describing acts in graphic, disturbing detail. Jennifer also created another fake email account, this time posing as a male friend named Rob Schmidt, a real person who worked with Jennifer, though he had no idea his identity was being used. Through this fake account, Jennifer as Rob confirmed to Lopez that yes, Jamie was abusing Jennifer, and yes, it was getting worse. So now Lopez believed he wasn't just hearing this from Jennifer. He had confirmation from a concerned friend. and he was getting taunting messages from the abuser himself. The web of lies was intricate, designed to manipulate Lopez's protective instincts and his military training. The fake Jamie Faith emails became increasingly threatening. One email claimed that Jamie and his friends were planning an underwater hot tub gang rape as a special anniversary surprise for October 9th, supposedly the anniversary of when Jamie and Jennifer first met. Lopez didn't sleep. He was losing his mind with worry about Jennifer. His messages to her became more desperate. He wanted to call the police. He wanted to fly to Dallas and get her out of there. He wanted to do something, but Jennifer always talked him out of it. She made him promise on his honor as a soldier that he wouldn't call the police, wouldn't tell Amber, wouldn't do anything without talking to her first. And Lopez, whose word meant everything to him from his military training, kept that promise. By early October 2020, Lopez was receiving emails from Rob Schmidt, telling him that Jamie's abuse was reaching critical levels. Jennifer's life was in danger. Something had to be done. According to Lopez's later testimony, he and Jennifer discussed options. Could she leave Jamie and come to Tennessee? Could they run away together? But Jennifer always had reasons why those plans wouldn't work. Jamie would come after them. He would hurt their daughter. He was too powerful, too connected. The only way Jennifer would ever be truly safe, she suggested, was if Jamie were gone. On October 8th, 2020, the day of Jamie and Jennifer's 15th anniversary, Darren Lopez made a decision. Late that evening, he got into his black Nissan Titan and began the drive from Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee to Oak Cliff, Texas. It was approximately 650 miles, about a 10-hour drive. Lopez later testified that he didn't make the final decision to kill Jamie until that moment, that evening. He saw himself as a soldier on a rescue mission. He had been trained to protect people, to neutralize threats. In his mind, Jamie Faith was a threat that needed to be eliminated to save the woman he loved. He drove through the night, arriving in Dallas in the early morning hours of October 9th, using information Jennifer had provided. He found the Faith's house in Oak Cliff. He parked nearby and waited, hiding in the yard of a neighboring property. Jennifer had told him the routine. She and Jamie always took Maggie for a walk in the early morning. Lopez just had to wait. At around 7:30 a.m., the Faith's front door opened. Jamie Faith stepped out with his wife and their dog, ready for their morning walk. They had no idea that just yards away, a man with a gun was watching them. Lopez emerged from his hiding spot, his face covered by a mask. He raised his gun, a Smith & Wesson that he had brought from Tennessee, and fired 7 times. 3 bullets struck Jamie Faith in the head. 3 hit him in the chest, tearing through his liver, lungs, heart, aorta, and colon. The final shot hit him in the groin, according to the defense. A deliberate message from a man who believed his victim had been sexually abusing a woman he loved. Jamie Faith collapsed in the street. He was dead almost instantly. After shooting Jamie, Lopez turned to Jennifer. According to the plan, he needed to make it look like a robbery. He pulled out duct tape and wrapped Jennifer's wrists, though not tightly. He attempted to steal her rings, though they wouldn't come off easily. Jennifer screamed. The screams captured on the neighbor's Ring doorbell camera, raw and terrifying. Then Lopez ran back to his truck and drove away, heading back to Tennessee. The entire execution had taken less than 2 minutes. But Lopez had made a mistake. When he had pulled into the neighborhood that morning, a neighbor named Emery Wilson had been arriving home from his night shift. Wilson's security camera had captured the truck, a black Nissan Titan with a distinctive T decal on the rear window. Lopez drove the 650 miles back to his property in Tennessee. Arriving home exhausted, he had done what he believed was necessary. He had saved Jennifer from her monster of a husband. Now they could be together. But back in Dallas, the investigation was moving quickly. The police had that crucial detail, the black Nissan Titan with a T decal. They released this information to the public, hoping someone would recognize the vehicle. And this is where Jennifer Faith's performance reached new levels. She appeared on television, tearfully begging the public to help identify the truck. "Somebody has got to know whose truck this is," she pleaded. But immediately after that interview, Jennifer sent a text message to Lopez. "I woke up in a bit of a panic. Something is eating away at me, telling me you need to take the sticker out of the back window of the truck." She was covering their tracks. She knew investigators would eventually trace the truck, and she was trying to eliminate the evidence. In another message, she coached Lopez on what to say if anyone asked about their relationship. If asked about you, you are an old friend going through a divorce. We talk every night because I am helping giving support with the girls. Just in case they pulled phone records and ask. Lopez responded, "Good idea, you are doing good." While Jennifer was publicly grieving and privately coaching Lopez, she was also busy with other matters. She filed an insurance claim through Jamie's employer, American Airlines, seeking nearly $629,000 in death benefits. She kept Lopez updated on the status of the claim, texting him about how they could use the money to buy a property in Tennessee where they could finally be together. She also began spending the GoFundMe money. While her community believed they were helping a devastated widow, Jennifer was using the funds to shower Lopez with gifts. She bought him a large screen television. She paid for airline tickets for him to travel. She gave him use of her credit cards, which she paid off using the donated funds. Jennifer Sivlin, who had organized the GoFundMe campaign, later reflected on this betrayal. "I look at it more as not stealing from GoFundMe, but stealing from her family, her friends, her community, people who love Jamie. That's who she was stealing from." But investigators were closing in. The cell phone data placed Lopez in Dallas at the time of the murder. His financial records showed the gas station stops along his route from Tennessee to Texas and back. The ballistics matched the bullets recovered from Jamie Faith's body came from Lopez's Smith & Wesson. On January 11, 2021, 3 months after Jamie's murder, ATF agents arrested Darren Lopez at his property in Cumberland Furnace, Tennessee. The murder weapon was found inside his home. Jennifer Faith, at this point, knew Lopez had been arrested, but rather than cutting ties, she doubled down. She was no longer able to communicate with him directly, but she found a way. On February 2nd, 2021, shortly before she herself was charged, Jennifer contacted a third party with a message to pass to Lopez, who was in custody in Dallas. "I am with him. Will always be with him regardless of whatever has happened." The message read, "I've needed to be cautious because every communication is being monitored. Please tell him ASAP. I will always be his." Even facing arrest, even knowing the evidence was mounting, Jennifer Faith wanted Darren Lopez to know she loved him. In February 2021, Jennifer Faith was charged with obstruction of justice for her attempts to hide evidence in Coach Lopez. But as investigators dug deeper into the digital evidence, the full scope of her manipulation became clear. They discovered the fake email accounts. They traced the IP addresses back to Jennifer. They found that every single email, supposedly from Jamie Faith and Rob Schmidt, had actually been written by Jennifer. The photos she had sent to Lopez, supposedly showing injuries from abuse, were either from a car accident years earlier or downloaded stock images from the internet. In September 2021, federal prosecutors added a much more serious charge: use of interstate commerce in the commission of murder for hire. This was a death penalty eligible offense. Jennifer Faith was facing the possibility of execution. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Jennifer made a deal. In February 2022, she pleaded guilty to the murder for hire charge. In exchange, prosecutors agreed to drop the obstruction charge and to recommend a sentence of life imprisonment instead of seeking the death penalty. As part of her plea agreement, Jennifer had to admit certain facts. She admitted that Darren Lopez had killed her husband. She admitted that she had created the fake email accounts. She admitted that she had lied about the abuse, that Jamie Faith had never physically or sexually abused her, that the photos were fake, that everything she had told Lopez was a fabrication designed to manipulate him into committing murder. The courtroom on the day of her sentencing was packed. Friends and family of Jamie Faith came to see justice served. The federal prosecutor, Rick Calvert, presented evidence of Jennifer's elaborate deception. The judge heard audio of Jennifer screaming on the morning of the murder. The performance captured on the Ring doorbell camera. They saw video of her tearful television interviews, begging for the public's help. When it came time for sentencing, U.S. District Judge Jane J. Boyle had some words for Jennifer Faith. "Mrs. Faith, I'm not sure why you're crying," Judge Boyle began. "What you did was such a betrayal." Judge Boyle called Jennifer Faith pure evil before sentencing her to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted how Jennifer had manipulated not just Lopez, but her entire community. She had exploited people's kindness, their grief, their desire to help. She had turned her husband's murder into a fundraising opportunity. Jason Snyder, Jamie Faith's best friend, read a victim impact statement on behalf of the family. He described Jamie as a regular down-to-earth guy who didn't deserve to die the way he did. He talked about the man he had known for more than 15 years. The friend who loved life and laughter, who had been stolen from them by someone he trusted most. But the story didn't end with Jennifer's sentencing. Darren Lopez still faced his own reckoning. Unlike Jennifer, Lopez chose to go to trial. He pleaded not guilty to murder. His defense team argued that Lopez had been manipulated and deceived. They emphasized his traumatic brain injury from his service in Iraq, his PTSD, his psychological vulnerabilities. They argued that Jennifer Faith had preyed on a disabled combat veteran, exploiting his protective instincts and his sense of honor. In July 2023, Lopez took the stand in his own defense. It was remarkable testimony. He described his high school romance with Jennifer, smiling and almost giddy when shown their prom photo. But then his demeanor changed as he described believing he was on a rescue mission to save Jennifer from a monster. I shot his chest. He started to turn, and then I continued to put in his side, he testified. At the time, I was thinking I was a noble soldier that did my job. I did what I was trained to do. I protected people. I kept them from a monster. Lopez testified that he didn't learn the truth, that he had been communicating only with Jennifer through fake accounts, until he was in jail. He described the moment of realization, the rage and betrayal he felt when he understood he had been manipulated into killing an innocent man. But the prosecution, led by Brandy Mitchell, was unrelenting. She pointed out the absurdity of Lopez's claims. Would a man who worked for American Airlines really send graphic emails about sexually abusing his wife to a stranger? Would a husband planning to drown his wife in a hot tub announce it in an email? This is a man who works for American Airlines, one of the most regulated industries on Earth. Mitchell said to Lopez on the stand, "He's going to email you about double penetration and splitting her like a peach. That makes sense to you, Mr. Lopez. He's going to hot tub drown his wife. And you don't tell anyone." Mitchell also hammered on Lopez's failure to seek help through legitimate channels. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're going to choose to kill a man, if you're going to end his life, if you're going to choose the time and the place where you end his life, like Darren did, then you better have a damn good reason, she argued. We are talking about the taking of a human life being justified by a high standard. It has to be your only option. Ladies and gentlemen, Lopez had so many options he did not take. The trial lasted 4 days. On July 28, 2023, the jury deliberated for just 1 hour and 15 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. During the punishment phase, Jamie's friends testified about his character, reminding the jury of the innocent man who had been killed. Melanie Blackburn, Jamie's former colleague and friend, remembered him fondly. He really loved life. He loved to travel. And he loved his daughter, she said. He was very goofy. He didn't like a silent room, so if we were in a meeting and there was a lull, he would always have something funny or witty to say. The jury sentenced Darren Lopez to 62 years in prison. At 51 years old, it was effectively a life sentence. His defense team announced plans to appeal. The case left deep scars on everyone it touched. Jamie Faith's friends and family lost a man they loved, stolen from them in the most violent and senseless way. Melissa Gonzalez and Shimona Jackson, the neighbors who had comforted Jennifer in the aftermath of the murder, felt fooled and betrayed. You don't want to let yourself believe that someone you care about could do something like that. Gonzalez said, "So for me, yeah, it took a while to get to the point of believing. The people who had donated to the GoFundMe campaign felt violated. They had given money out of compassion, wanting to help someone in crisis. Instead, their generosity had been used to buy gifts for their loved one's killer. GoFundMe ultimately offered full refunds to anyone who had donated, but the sense of betrayal lingered. Darren Lopez's daughters lost their father, not to death but to prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. Whatever his intentions, whatever he believed he was doing, the man they knew was gone. And somewhere in a federal prison, Jennifer Faith, now known as prisoner number whatever, lives with what she did. Federal prosecutor Rick Calvert summed it up at her sentencing. Miss Faith put on quite a performance in the wake of her husband's murder. She poured out her sob story to reporters and law enforcement, then headed home to orchestrate her cover-up. But crocodile tears didn't stop the feds. We were committed to getting justice for Jamie, and with the judge's imposition of a life sentence, we're one step closer. The murder of Jamie Faith raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of manipulation and trust. How could an intelligent, capable man like Darren Lopez be deceived so completely? How could Jennifer Faith maintain such an elaborate fiction for so long? The answers lie in the perfect storm of factors that Jennifer exploited. Lopez's traumatic brain injury made him more susceptible to manipulation. His PTSD and his sense of military honor created blind spots she could exploit. His isolation in rural Tennessee meant he had no outside perspectives to challenge the narrative she was feeding him. And most crucially, Jennifer understood something fundamental about human psychology. If you want someone to believe a lie, you don't tell them from a single source. You create multiple independent sources that all confirm the same story. By creating the fake emails from Jamie Faith and Rob Schmidt, Jennifer made Lopez believe he was getting confirmation from multiple people. It wasn't just her word, it was her husband admitting to the abuse. It was a concerned friend confirming the danger. The web of lies was intricate and comprehensive. The case also raises questions about how we respond to victims of domestic violence. Jennifer Faith exploited Lopez's protective instincts and society's growing awareness of intimate partner violence. She knew that claims of abuse would be taken seriously, that they would provoke an emotional response. She weaponized that awareness to manipulate Lopez into murder. In the end, 3 lives were destroyed. Jamie Faith lost his life on a quiet October morning, denied the future he had worked so hard to build. Darren Lopez, despite his service to his country, will spend the rest of his life in prison for taking the life of an innocent man. And Jennifer Faith, the architect of it all, will never see freedom again, spending her remaining years in federal prison. On that October morning in 2020, when Jamie Faith stepped out of his front door with his wife and dog, he had no idea that the person walking beside him had plotted his death. He trusted her completely, and that trust in the end is what killed him. The murder of Jamie Faith is a reminder that sometimes the greatest danger doesn't come from strangers in masks. Sometimes it comes from the people we love, the people we trust, the people who sleep beside us at night and know all our vulnerabilities. Jamie Faith's friends remember him as a man who loved life, who made people laugh, who brought joy to those around him. On October 9th, 2020, that life was stolen from him, but his memory lives on in the people who loved him, in the stories they tell about him, in the reminder that he deserved so much better than the death he received. Rest in peace, Jamie Faith. Your story will not be forgotten. Please note that this case demonstrates the complex intersections of domestic manipulation, psychological vulnerability, and the devastating consequences of deception. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. If you're concerned about someone's claims of abuse, there are proper legal channels and support systems designed to help. Violence is never the answer. If this is your first time listening to one of our true crime stories, welcome to Mr. Sleepy Crime, where we explore these cases in a calm and respectful way. I also want to take a moment to appreciate my amazing subscribers who've been rocking with me. Thank you so much for your continued support. If you're still awake and listening, don't forget to drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from and the current time in your corner of the world. Or just say something to let me know you're still here. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our second story. Story 2. In the suburbs of Maryland, just 20 miles north of Washington, D.C., there lived a teacher who everyone seemed to love. Her name was Laura Wallen, and if you asked anyone who knew her, students, colleagues, parents, they'd all tell you the same thing. She was special. The kind of teacher who made you excited to come to class. The kind of person who remembered your birthday and asked about your life outside the classroom walls. Laura taught social studies and law at Wild Lake High School in Columbia, Maryland. Before that, she'd spent 7 years at Murray Hill Middle School, shaping young minds and making history come alive for her students. In 2016, she received an honor that meant the world to her. She was named Teacher of the Year by the senior class. It wasn't just a title. It was a reflection of who she was. At 31 years old, Laura had built a life she was proud of. She lived in Olney, Maryland. In a modest home on Rolling Meadow Way, she had a passion for theater, the kind that made her eyes light up when she talked about it. And in the summer of 2017, she discovered something that filled her with a joy she'd never quite felt before. She was pregnant. 4 months along, carrying a baby boy she'd already named Reed. The father was a man named Tyler Tessier. He was 32, a year older than Laura. Worked as a landscaper. Sometimes he picked up shifts at a meat processing facility called KS Coots in Damascus, a rural area about 40 miles from the city. Tyler lived in Damascus on Holsey Road, in a world that felt far removed from Laura's suburban classroom. They'd known each other for about 10 years. Their relationship wasn't simple. It never had been. They were on and off, breaking up and getting back together in that way. Some couples do when neither person can quite let go. There were arguments. Tyler rarely showed up for family events. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. Laura's family noticed. They worried, but Laura believed in him, or at least in the possibility of him. When she found out she was pregnant in June 2017, everything seemed to change. Tyler appeared to step up. He showed Laura's father an engagement ring, signaling his intentions. He spoke of marriage, of building a future together. Laura's father, Mark, wanted to believe it too. Here was Tyler, finally showing responsibility, finally becoming the man Laura deserved. But there was something Mark and Laura didn't know. Something Tyler had kept hidden with the practiced ease of a man who'd been lying for years. Tyler was engaged to another woman. Had been for 7 years. He'd proposed to her in 2017 with the same ring he'd shown Laura's father. He'd been living a double life, splitting his time between two women who both believed they were his only love. To Tyler, the lying came naturally. It was like breathing. One woman in Olney, one woman somewhere else. Two separate worlds that he'd carefully kept from colliding. Until Laura found out. We don't know exactly when or how she discovered the truth. Maybe she saw something on his phone. Maybe someone told her. Maybe she just knew, the way you sometimes do when the person you love has been keeping secrets. But by late August 2017, Laura knew about the other woman, and they wanted answers. On August 27th, Laura sent a text message to Tyler's fiancé. Her words were careful, measured. She wasn't looking for a fight. She wrote, "It's important that some things are cleared up, and I imagine that if you were in my position, you'd want some answers as well. By no means is this an attempt at confrontation." She wanted to meet face to face, woman to woman, to understand what had been happening, to figure out what came next. When Tyler found out that Laura had contacted his fiancée, something shifted. He sent a text message that in hindsight reads like a terrible prophecy. "I could literally kill her for what she's done." The first weekend of September 2017 should have been a happy time. The school year was about to start. Laura had spent weeks preparing her classroom, organizing lessons, getting everything ready for her students. She was excited, nervous, maybe about being pregnant and teaching at the same time, but mostly excited. Tyler was supposed to spend that weekend in Pennsylvania with his fiancée. They were going to look at bridesmaid dresses for their upcoming wedding. But on Friday evening, September 1st, Tyler told her he couldn't make the 4-hour drive. He said he'd hurt his knee walking her dog. He needed to rest. There was nothing wrong with his knee. Laura saw her sister that Friday evening. They talked, laughed, made plans. It was the last time anyone in Laura's family would see her alive. On Saturday, September 2nd, Laura and Tyler went to a Safeway grocery store in Olney between 8:30 and 9:30 in the evening. Security cameras captured them together, walking through the aisles, making a purchase. It was the last confirmed sighting of Laura Wallen. That same evening, Laura sent her sister a text message. It read, "Tyler has me on an adventure in the country. Don't know why I'm here, but it's for something." Her sister, curious, asked for a photo. Laura sent one. A wide open field with a tree line in the distance. Vast. Empty. She texted, "I'm waiting in a field. It was beautiful. In a way. The kind of place where you might imagine building a house someday, raising a family, watching sunsets." Tyler had brought her there, to this remote field in Damascus, with promises of a future. Maybe this is where they'd live one day, he might have said. Maybe this is where Reed would grow up. But that wasn't why Tyler brought her there. The field sat adjacent to the meat processing facility where Tyler worked. His friend owned the property, acres of open land and woods. The kind of place where you could be alone for hours and never see another soul. Sometime that weekend, in that field, Tyler shot Laura in the back of her head. A single bullet. execution style. Then he dug a shallow grave and buried her there, her body covered by dirt, her clothing barely hidden beneath the soil. He left her there, 4 months pregnant, 31 years old. A teacher who'd spent her life caring for others. Then Tyler went back to his life. On Sunday night, September 3rd, around 10:30, Tyler sent a text message to an acquaintance. He asked for a late-night ride to Baltimore. It was an odd request, one the friend found strange enough to decline. Tyler apologized and said he was just trying to clean up a mess. On Monday morning, September 4th, Laura's sister received text messages from Laura's phone. They seemed off immediately. One message claimed that Laura was 95% sure Tyler wasn't the father of the baby. Another mentioned getting in touch with someone named Antoine. Actually Antoine, an ex-boyfriend Laura hadn't spoken to in 2 years. The name was even misspelled in the text. Laura's sister knew something was wrong. Her sister wouldn't share something that important over text. They were close. They told each other everything face to face. Laura's family tried calling her. No answer. They tried texting. Nothing. And then when Wild Lake High School called to say Laura hadn't shown up for the first day of school on Tuesday, September 5th, everyone knew Laura would never miss the first day of school. Never. If she wasn't there, something was desperately wrong. Her family reported her missing that evening. Montgomery County Police began investigating immediately. They went to her home and everything seemed normal. No signs of a struggle. No indication of where she might have gone. Detectives spoke with Laura's family. They learned about Tyler, about the pregnancy, about the complicated relationship. Tyler became a person of interest almost immediately, but police didn't have enough to arrest him. Not yet. On September 7th, 4 days after Laura went missing, an employee at an apartment complex in Columbia, Maryland, found something strange near a dumpster. A driver's license. Laura Wallen's driver's license. He'd seen posts about her disappearance on Facebook and immediately called police. When officers arrived, they found Laura's car, a 2011 black Ford Escape, backed into a parking space. The front license plate had been removed. Between September 5th and 11th, detectives interviewed Tyler multiple times. Each time his story changed. First, he denied knowing anything about Laura's disappearance. Then he admitted to driving her car to Columbia. He admitted to throwing away her phone and license in the dumpster. He admitted to sending those text messages from her phone, pretending to be her. He admitted he was engaged to another woman, something he'd initially denied. But he didn't admit to murder. Not yet. Police started piecing things together. They discovered Tyler had been making repeated trips to the property in Damascus, the same property in the photo Laura had sent her sister. The field where she'd been waiting. Multiple people saw him there after Laura went missing. He'd go out there and just stay. Walking the property. Watching. On September 11th, a Monday, a week after Laura's disappearance, police held a press conference. Laura's parents, Mark and Gwen Wallen, sat at a table, appealing to the public for help. They announced a $25,000 reward for information. And sitting right next to them, holding Laura's mother's hand, was Tyler Tessier. He cried as he spoke to the cameras. His voice broke with emotion. Laura, if you're listening, it doesn't matter what's happened. It doesn't matter what type of trouble. There's nothing we can't fix together. Myself and your family. There are so many people that miss you. Laura's mother, Gwen, sat beside him, shaking so badly she needed both hands to hold his one hand. It was her husband later said, the hardest thing she'd ever done. But they did it, because if Tyler knew where their daughter was, if there was any chance she was still alive, they needed him to talk. The truth was, detectives already suspected Tyler. They'd found inconsistencies in his stories. They knew about the other woman. They knew he'd been at the field multiple times. This press conference was a calculated move. They wanted to see what Tyler would say, how he would act, whether he would slip up. 2 days later, on Wednesday, September 13th, police executed a search warrant on the Damascus property. It was a sprawling piece of land, hundreds of acres of fields and woods. The search and rescue team arrived with cadaver dogs. The dogs picked up a scent in a field adjacent to the main property. Officers found a patch of disturbed earth, freshly dug, and there in a shallow grave, they found her, Laura Wallen's body. still partially clothed, the fabric of her purple clothing visible through the dirt. She'd been there the whole time, just miles from where Tyler stayed, steps from where he worked, in the exact spot from the photo she'd sent her sister. When she'd written, "Tyler has me on an adventure in the country," Tyler was arrested that evening in Hyattstown. He was charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and making false statements to police. The autopsy revealed what investigators had suspected. Laura had been shot once in the back of the head. The bullet had been too damaged for forensic testing, but it was consistent with a .22 caliber round. Police found 4.22 caliber rifles at the meat processing facility where Tyler worked. At his bond hearing the next day, a judge looked at Tyler via video monitor and said, "I do think that you are a danger to the community." He was held without bond. Laura's father, Mark, spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. His voice was tight with anger and grief. "He is a monster," he said. "He's a liar." As the investigation continued, more details emerged. Tyler had told friends, just days after the murder, about a conversation regarding someone in an abusive relationship. "If we kill him," Tyler had said casually, "there's lots of fields where bodies can be buried in Montgomery County." He'd been planning it, thinking about it. Maybe for weeks, maybe from the moment Laura sent that text to his fiancée. Prosecutors built their case throughout 2018. They believed the motive was clear. Tyler's carefully constructed double life was about to collapse. Laura had discovered everything. She was pregnant with his child. She wanted to meet his fiancée face to face. He couldn't let that happen, so he arranged to take her on an adventure to a remote field. He told her stories about their future, and then he shot her in the back of the head and buried her in a grave he'd likely already dug. The trial was scheduled to begin on September 6, 2018, almost exactly 1 year after Laura's death. Jury selection took place over several days. 65 prospective jurors arrived on Thursday morning, September 6th, ready for opening arguments to begin. Tyler had been awake since 4 in the morning, preparing for court. Guards saw him in his cell at 4:36. Breakfast was brought to him at 4:45. He refused to eat. At 4:55 in the morning, a guard found Tyler hanging in his cell, a bedsheet wrapped around his neck. He was pronounced dead at 5:32. At 9:30 that morning, Judge Michael Mason addressed the prospective jurors. "I know part of my instructions to you was to avoid all exposure to local news," he said. "So I expect what I'm about to tell you will come as a shock. There is no easy way to tell you this, but the defendant was found dead in his cell at 5 o'clock this morning, apparently a suicide. So there will be no trial." Tyler had left behind 5 letters. None of them admitted to murdering Laura Wallen. The contents were never made public. Later that day, prosecutors held a press conference. Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy stood before reporters, visibly frustrated. "We were robbed this morning of the opportunity to allow the public to know the true nature and details of this crime," he said. "There should be no question in anyone's mind in this county that this was Laura's killer. I think today was where it was all going to crush down on him. He knew the discovery. He knew the evidence. And he knew today was the reckoning. I think he took the coward's way out." He continued. Tyler Tessier had psychotic behavior that he carried on as he maintained a dual relationship with 2 women, one for 10 years and one for 7 years. To Tyler Tessier, lying was like breathing. Laura's family stood beside the prosecutors. Her father, Mark, said, "Our daughter Laura was love and light. It has been a very difficult year for our entire family." Laura's sister Jen, her voice breaking, said she'd been looking forward to experiencing the journey of motherhood alongside Laura, to watching their children grow up together. All of that had been taken away. Laura's brother-in-law, John, noted that in all the years Tyler had been with Laura, 10 years, he'd never shown up for a single family event. Not one birthday, not one holiday, not one anniversary. "He stood our family up for the last time today," John said. "There would be no trial, no verdict, no justice in the way we usually understand it." But Laura's legacy didn't end there. Her family worked tirelessly with the Maryland legislature to pass what became known as Laura and Reed's Law. The law adds an additional 10 years to a murder sentence if the prosecutor can prove the perpetrator knew the victim was pregnant. It was a small victory in the face of tremendous loss. A way to acknowledge that Tyler hadn't just killed Laura, he'd killed Reed too. The grandson Laura's parents would never know. At Murray Hill Middle School, where Laura had taught for 7 years, two teachers created the Laura Wallen Drama Scholarship to honor her love of theater. Every year, students receive funding to attend summer programs at the Columbia Center for Theatrical Arts, keeping Laura's passion alive in young performers. In 2024, 7 years after her death, Laura's story was featured in the Hulu series How I Caught My Killer. The episode, titled I Know What the Devil Looks Like, focused not on Tyler, but on Laura, who she was, what she meant to her students and family, how her memory continues to shape her community. Former colleagues spoke about her warmth, her dedication, her ability to make every student feel seen. Former students shared memories of her classes, how she made history come alive, how she cared about their lives beyond the classroom. If Laura Wallen wasn't physically there, one colleague said, something had to have happened to her. Something was desperately wrong. Because that was who Laura was. Present, reliable, caring. The kind of person who showed up. The kind of teacher who changed lives. She should have been there on September 5th, 2017, when school started. She should have been there to see her students grow, to become a mother, to build the life she'd been dreaming of. Instead, she's remembered. Loved, missed by hundreds of people whose lives she touched in her 31 years. Tyler Tessier made a choice that September weekend, a calculated, deliberate choice to end two lives. Laura's and Reed's, rather than face the consequences of his lies. He lived a double life for years, deceiving everyone who cared about him, and when that life began to crumble, he chose murder. And then when the moment came to face justice, to answer for what he'd done, he chose to escape one final time. Laura never got that choice. Reed never got a chance at life, but their memory endures. In scholarships, in legislation, in the hearts of students who still remember the teacher who believed in them, in a family that refuses to let Laura be defined by how she died, instead choosing to celebrate how she lived. Love and light, her father said. That's what Laura was, and perhaps that's the real story here. Not the darkness of what Tyler did, but the light that Laura brought into the world during her time here. A light that continues to shine, even now, years after that terrible September day, when a teacher went on an adventure in the country and never came home. Please, if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. And if you haven't already, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now let's move on to our third story. Story 3. The morning of April 7th, 2018, began like any other Saturday in the quiet F-section neighborhood of Palm Coast, Florida. The sun was climbing higher in a clear sky. Inside the modest house on Felter Lane, a 6-year-old boy sat in the living room, waiting. His mother had promised him something special that day. They were going to the county fair together. In the kitchen, 25-year-old Brandy Salenza moved about, getting ready for the day. She was petite, standing just over 5 feet tall, with an easy smile that those who knew her remembered fondly. Friends from school would later describe her as one of the sweetest people they'd ever known. A great mom, a loyal friend. The house was equipped with an elaborate security system. Multiple cameras pointed both inside and out, monitoring nearly every room. The system had been installed by Brandy's husband, Keith Johansson, who was 36 years old and significantly taller than his young wife. The cameras recorded constantly, storing footage on servers maintained by a company in California. That morning, one of those cameras captured Brandy in the kitchen with her son. She was calm, drinking something, talking with the boy about their plans. The child told his mother he loved her. Those may have been the last words Brandy heard that truly mattered, because within moments, everything would change. At 10:38 in the morning, the Flagler County Sheriff's Office received a 911 call. The caller was Keith Johansson. His voice came through the line, reporting that his wife had been shot. He claimed he'd been in the shower when he heard gunshots. When he emerged, wet and confused, he said he found Brandy with gunshot wounds. But the cameras, those silent witnesses Keith himself had installed, told a different story. When deputies on Palm Coast Fire Rescue arrived at 23 Felter Lane, they found a scene that immediately raised questions. Brandy Salenza lay in the master bedroom, struck by two 9mm bullets. One had entered the center of her chest. The other had hit her right breast. She was 25 years old, and she was gone. Keith Johansen stood there, giving his account. He'd been in the shower, he insisted. He heard shots. He rushed out. He didn't know what happened. Maybe, he suggested, Brandy had accidentally shot herself, though how someone shoots themselves twice with a 9mm handgun was a question that hung heavy in the air. The home was a crime scene now, and investigators began their methodical work. They photographed everything. They documented the positions of two firearms found near Brandy's body, a Canik handgun and a Beretta. They collected evidence, and they secured the surveillance footage. What they found in that footage would transform this from a tragic accident into something far darker. Sheriff Rick Staley would later say they suspected from the start this was a murder. But time was on their side. They took it slowly, building the strongest case possible. The medical examiner performed an autopsy on April 9th. The ruling came back. Homicide. This was no accident. This was no suicide. The investigation grew more complex. The surveillance system became central to understanding what had happened. Search warrants had to be obtained to access footage stored out of state. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement analyzed forensic evidence. Detectives conducted interviews. And slowly a picture emerged of life inside that house on Felter Lane. It was not the picture Keith Johansen wanted anyone to see. The surveillance footage revealed a relationship built on control and fear. Keith Johansen had wired his home with cameras everywhere, including in the master bedroom. He could watch, he could review, he could monitor. And what those cameras captured in the days before Brandy's death was chilling. On April 5th, 2 days before the shooting, the bedroom camera recorded hours of confrontation. It wasn't a fight in any conventional sense. Fights imply two people engaged in conflict. What the camera showed was something different. A sustained, brutal verbal assault. Keith Johansen berated his wife for hours. He insulted her. He degraded her. He threatened her repeatedly with death. The words he used were explicit and vicious. "I've got to get away from you, or I'm going to kill you," he told her on camera. "Call 911 and get me out of here, or you aren't waking up." He accused her of infidelity, his jealousy consuming. "I'll teach you to mess around again," he said, his words dripping with menace. At times he held a gun while he threatened her. At times he used racial slurs when discussing men he believed she'd been with. The psychological torture went on for 5 hours that night. Brandy mostly endured in silence. By the end of the recording, she was curled in a fetal position on her own bed, broken down by the relentless cruelty. "Are you afraid yet, Brandy?" he asked her at one point, "because you are going to be." Friends who knew Brandy would later point out the physical disparity between them. Keith towered over her. She was so small. "There's no way she could do anything to hurt him," one friend would say, heartbroken. The cameras also revealed something else. Drug use. Both Keith and Brandy had been using methamphetamine. Keith later claimed they'd been on a 10-day binge. Though Brandy's use appeared less extensive, the drugs added another layer of chaos to an already volatile situation. But it was what happened on April 7th that mattered most. The problem was, the camera that would have captured the actual shooting was missing its footage. Either it had been erased, or it had been removed entirely. Conveniently, the one camera that could have shown exactly what happened in that bedroom when Brandy died had no recording to offer. What the cameras did show was Keith's behavior immediately after. As Brandy lay dying, as he spoke to the 911 dispatcher, the living room camera captured him not rendering aid, but instead hurrying around the room, hiding drugs and drug paraphernalia. When the dispatcher instructed him to apply pressure to Brandy's wounds, he made excuses. There was too much stuff around her, he said. He couldn't see the wounds clearly. He'd just gotten out of the shower and didn't want to slip and accidentally cause the gun to go off. The dispatcher told him how to help his wife. Keith Johansen instead cleaned up evidence of their drug use. His wife bled out in the next room. 20 days passed between the shooting and Keith Johansen's arrest. During that time, detectives worked carefully, gathering evidence, analyzing the surveillance footage, building their case. On April 27th, sheriff's deputies arrested Keith at 4 in the afternoon. He was charged initially with second-degree murder with a weapon. Then came the interrogation. Detectives George Christokakabels and Nicole Quintieri sat down with Keith Johansen for what would become a 12-hour interview. The detectives were skilled, patient, giving him every opportunity to tell the truth. Detective Quintieri was particularly solicitous, her approach gentle but sharp. She gave him openings. She framed things in ways she thought might resonate with him. Keith Johansen lied and lied and lied. He maintained that Brandy had shot herself. When pressed on how someone shoots themselves twice, he adjusted his story. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe she was suicidal. He didn't really know what happened because he was in the shower. He'd heard shots and come running out, water still dripping from his body. At one point, Detective Quintieri asked him if there was anything else he thought was important for their investigation. Anything that might help them get justice for his wife. After a 5-second pause, Keith replied, "Better gun control in schools. Better gun control at schools. Readily available." The detective's confusion was audible. "What in the world does that have to do with this?" she asked. He had no good answer. The lies weren't just told to detectives. Keith lied to the EMTs who arrived at the scene. He lied to his own parents, maintaining his false version of events for at least 20 days. When investigators later suggested that perhaps Brandy's 6-year-old son had information, Keith even floated the possibility that the child might have been involved. A despicable attempt to shift blame onto an innocent boy who'd just lost his mother. But the detectives knew the truth. The evidence didn't support any version of Keith's story except one: he had shot his wife twice. Deliberately. And then he tried to cover it up. When the surveillance footage was fully analyzed and prosecutors saw the threats, the abuse, the pattern of control and violence captured on video, the charges were upgraded. Keith Johansen now faced first-degree murder, premeditated, intentional killing. The trial began more than 3 years after Brandy's death, in October 2021. Circuit Judge Chris France presided. The courtroom was divided along predictable lines. On one side sat a dozen family members and friends of Brandy Salenza. Some had attended every day of the trial. Brandy's father was there throughout. On the opposite side sat 3 members of Keith's family. The prosecution was led by assistant state attorneys, Jennifer Dunton and Jason Lewis. Their case was built on the surveillance footage, the forensic evidence, and Keith's own lies. They intended to show the jury exactly who Keith Johansen was and what he'd done. Defense attorney Gary Wood had a problem. Every story Keith had told up to this point had been proven false. The accidental shooting claim didn't work, not with 2 bullets. The suicide claim was absurd for the same reason. The suggestion that the child was involved was both cruel and impossible. So Wood pivoted to a new defense, one that would require Keith to testify in his own trial. Self-defense. In opening arguments, Wood told the jury that Brandy had attacked Keith, that she'd pointed a gun at him, that he'd fired in self-defense to protect himself from imminent harm. It was a dramatic shift in strategy, and it meant abandoning all of Keith's previous explanations as lies. Wood acknowledged this directly. Yes, Keith had lied to the 911 dispatcher. Yes, he'd lied to police, to EMTs, to his parents. But now, finally, he was telling the truth. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. They showed the jury the surveillance footage from April 5th, the night of the 5-hour verbal assault. The clips were difficult to watch. The judge had initially considered whether they should be admitted, given their explicit and disturbing nature, but they were relevant. They showed Keith's state of mind. They showed the threats. They showed a man who had told his wife on camera that he would kill her. Those were the words of this defendant, 2 days before his wife, Brandy Salenza, was found shot and killed in their home. Dunton told the jury. Medical examiner testimony established exactly how Brandy died. 2 gunshot wounds. The forensic weapons analyst explained the mechanics of the shooting. The detectives testified about the investigation, the interrogation, the evolving stories Keith told, and then Keith Johansen took the stand. His testimony was remarkable for its lack of emotion. He sat in the witness box and explained, in a clinical, detached manner, how he'd shot his wife. "Man, I wish I had a diagram to show you," he said at one point, as if discussing a mechanical problem rather than the moment he ended his wife's life. He described the 10 days of methamphetamine use. He explained away the threats on the surveillance footage, claiming he didn't really mean them. The 5-hour verbal assault wasn't a big fight, he insisted. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. He admitted to lying to everyone, but claimed he did so to protect Brandy's reputation. He didn't want his parents to know about the drugs. Now, he said, Brandy had come at him with a gun. She was out of her mind from drug withdrawal. She was gonna shoot him. He had no choice. He fired twice in self-defense. The prosecution's cross-examination was devastating. They confronted him with each lie, each inconsistency, each changed story. They asked him about hiding drugs while Brandy died. They asked him about his refusal to help her. They reminded the jury that Keith had suggested a neighbor might have done it, that Brandy's own child might have done it, before finally admitting he pulled the trigger. The testimony revealed something else, something the jury would later consider. Brandy's son had told investigators that right before he heard the gunshots, he heard his mother scream, a scream of fear, a scream that contradicted everything about Keith's self-defense claim. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and 50 minutes. 8 men and 4 women considered the evidence, the testimony, the surveillance footage that showed who Keith Johansen really was. They had questions during their deliberation. They wanted to know whether the fact that there was no video of the actual shooting, no eyewitness besides Keith himself, constituted reasonable doubt. The prosecution had anticipated this. You get to rely on circumstantial evidence. Assistant State Attorney Lewis had told them in closing arguments. The jury examined what they knew. Keith's threats to kill Brandy on camera, his possession and brandishing of firearms in those threats, the missing camera footage from the exact location where the shooting occurred, the 2 bullets in Brandy's chest, the fact that Keith had lied repeatedly, changing his story multiple times, the drugs he'd hidden while his wife died, the 6-year-old boy who heard his mother scream. On October 28, 2021, they reached their unanimous decision. Guilty. First-degree premeditated murder. When the verdict was read, Brandy's family burst into tears. Some of them had sat through the entire trial, watching the surveillance footage, hearing the threats, learning details about their loved one's final days that no family should have to know. Keith Johansen showed no emotion. As soon as the word guilty was spoken, he thrust both fists forward toward the bailiff beside him, ready to be handcuffed. His family and friends, the 3 who'd been there earlier, had not returned for the verdict. The sentencing was immediate. After a brief but emotional victim impact statement from Brandy's sister, Judge France sentenced Keith Johansen to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A mother is murdered by her husband and her 6-year-old child is left to suffer the consequences. State Attorney R.J. Lariza said afterward, life in prison gives little consolation for such a callous and brutal murder. Keith Johansen, who'd spent years controlling his wife with threats and violence, who'd surrounded her with cameras to monitor her every move, who'd psychologically tortured her for hours on end, had finally faced consequences. The cameras he'd installed, meant to control, had instead captured evidence of his own brutality. The case didn't end with the verdict. Keith Johansen appealed his conviction to the 5th District Court of Appeal. His attorneys argued multiple points. That testimony from a witness via Zoom violated his right to confront his accuser. That the surveillance video clips shouldn't have been admitted. That there were issues with how evidence was handled. In April 2023, the appeals court issued its ruling. The conviction was upheld. The only modification was a minor technical error about investigative costs. Keith Johansen would remain in prison for life, but Keith wasn't finished. In September 2025, more than 7 years after Brandy's death, he returned to court with a new claim, ineffective representation. He argued that his trial attorney, Gary Wood, should have filed a stand your ground motion before trial. Florida's stand your ground law allows a person to use deadly force in self-defense without a duty to retreat. If such a motion succeeds, charges can be dismissed before trial even begins. Keith testified that he told his attorney he was in fear for his life, that he had to use deadly force to prevent imminent danger. He argued that Wood's failure to pursue this defense was incompetent representation that warranted either a new trial or a reduced sentence. At the hearing, Wood himself testified. He explained that he and Keith had discussed stand your ground, but Wood advised against it because of the huge discrepancy in Keith's various accounts of what happened. A stand your ground hearing would require Keith to testify under oath, and that testimony could then be used against him at trial. Wood had made a strategic decision based on his client's credibility problems. The prosecution, now represented by Assistant State Attorney Jason Lewis, pointed out the flaws in Keith's argument. How could stand your ground apply when Brandy's son heard her scream right before she was shot? You claim that it was self-defense, Lewis asked Keith during the hearing. You don't think 12 people hearing that Brandy screamed right before you shot and killed her, that's going to push them over the top to think that you premeditated killing her? Keith had no good answer. He said Brandy was screaming and not in her right mind. Circuit Judge Dawn Nichols, the third judge to preside over aspects of this case, took Keith's motion under advisement. On October 21, 2025, she issued her ruling, a 24-page order denying every aspect of Keith's appeal. She found his testimony inconsistent and not credible. She ruled that even if a stand your ground hearing had been held, Keith would have lost, because the jury at trial had rejected that same self-defense claim. She addressed each of his other objections: the fingerprint testing, the alleged incompleteness of video footage, the decision not to call Brandy's son to testify. On that last point, the judge revealed something that brought the tragedy full circle. Wood had not called the boy to testify because the child would have said he heard his mother scream before she was shot. And because of the child's age, calling him would have been inappropriate and potentially harmful. The judge's order included a wrenching detail. Before Brandy was killed, surveillance video showed her in the kitchen with her son, calmly drinking something, preparing for their day at the county fair. The fair they would never attend together. Keith Johansson's attempts to overturn his conviction had failed completely. He remains in prison, serving life without parole at a state facility in Lowell, Florida. He is now 43 years old. Brandy Ruth Salenza was born on March 1st, 1993. She was only 25 when she died. Friends remembered her as vibrant, sweet, a wonderful mother to her young son. One friend who'd gone to school with her and celebrated an 18th birthday together said simply, "There's no way, absolutely no way, he was trying to defend himself in this matter." Her son, who was 6 years old that April morning, is now a teenager. He lost his mother to violence in his own home, one room away from where he sat waiting to go to the fair. The trauma of that loss, of hearing that scream, of the aftermath, is something he'll carry forever. The case raises difficult questions about domestic violence, about control and abuse, about the ways technology can both reveal and conceal truth. Keith Johansson installed cameras throughout his home, presumably to monitor and control his wife. But those same cameras became the evidence that convicted him, showing the world his threats, his abuse, his calculated cruelty. They showed him threatening to kill Brandy, and 2 days later he did exactly that. The cameras couldn't save Brandy, but they ensured that the truth came out, that justice was served, that Keith Johansson would spend the rest of his life in prison for what he'd done. On Felter Lane in Palm Coast, life has moved on. Other families live in those houses now, going about their daily routines, their children playing, their lives unfolding. But the memory of what happened in that house on April 7th, 2018, lingered. A young mother, preparing to take her son to the county fair, told by her little boy that he loved her, shot twice by the man who'd promised to protect her. Life in prison gives little consolation, State Attorney Larizza had said. For such a callous and brutal murder, he was right. No sentence can bring Brandy back. No verdict can undo the trauma inflicted on her son. But Keith Johansson's conviction means he will never hurt anyone else. He will never control another person with threats and cameras and violence. The house on Felter Lane is quiet now. The cameras, if they remain, watch over a different family, living a different story. And somewhere in Florida, a teenager carries forward the memory of his mother, the woman Keith Johansson called his wife, but treated as something far less, a woman who deserved so much more than the ending she received that Saturday morning, just before they were supposed to go to the fair. Please, I'm just putting it out there. If you're still awake and listening, drop a comment. Let me know where you're tuning in from, the time in your part of the world, or just say something to let me know you're still with me. And of course, if you haven't already, like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next true crime story for sleep. Now, Let's move on to our fourth story. Story 4. Tonight we'll explore a story that reminds us how precious life is, and how sometimes the people we try to leave behind refuse to let us go. This is the story of Dr. Amy Harwick, a woman who dedicated her life to helping others heal, only to become the victim of the very thing she helped so many escape from. Tonight we journey to Hollywood, California, where beneath the glittering lights and promise of dreams, a tragedy unfolded on Valentine's Day 2020. A tragedy that had been building for nearly a decade. Invisible to most, but terrifying to those who truly knew what was coming. Let's begin at the beginning, with a woman who chose to live life on her own terms. Amy Nicole Harwick was born on May 20th, 1981 in Pennsylvania. From the very start of her life, things weren't conventional. She was adopted as a child and spent a brief period in foster care during her teenage years. These early experiences of instability and searching for belonging would shape the woman she would become. Someone deeply empathetic, someone who understood what it meant to feel lost. Growing up in Lansdale, a small town outside Philadelphia, Amy was drawn to the unconventional, while other teenagers were joining cheerleading squads. Amy was exploring darker interests. She loved horror movies. She collected taxidermy. She kept objects preserved in formaldehyde jars. Her family would later describe her as quirky and fun, someone who embraced the macabre without apology. But beneath this fascination with the dark and unusual was something deeper. Amy was intensely curious about human behavior. She wanted to understand why people did the things they did. What drove someone to violence? What made people capable of both great love and terrible cruelty? These questions consumed her. In high school, she met Sharon Little in the bathroom, a place where so many teenage friendships begin. Sharon was crying after learning about a friend's death, and Amy, a stranger at the time, offered her a hug. That simple act of kindness defined who Amy was. She saw pain and she moved toward it, not away from it. After graduating from North Penn High School in 1999, Amy made a bold decision. She married a heavy metal musician and moved across the country to Los Angeles in 2001. It was a fresh start, a chance to reinvent herself in a city where everyone was trying to become someone. To support herself, Amy worked multiple jobs. She was a personal trainer, releasing a workout DVD under the name Amy Nicole. She worked as a go-go dancer, a bartender at Hollywood parties, and even modeled for Playboy under the name Nicolette Novak. But these were just means to an end. Amy was putting herself through school. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology from California State Polytechnic University, then pursued a master's degree in clinical psychology from Pepperdine University. She completed a PhD from the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, specializing in an area that many people whispered about, but few discussed openly: sex therapy. By the early 2010s, Dr. Amy Harwick had established herself as a respected marriage and family therapist in West Hollywood. Her specialty was helping people with sexual self-awareness and intimacy issues. She worked with clients who had experienced trauma, particularly women who had survived sexual abuse and domestic violence. She understood their pain because she had experienced her own. In 2014, she published a book titled The New Sex Bible for Women, the complete guide to sexual self-awareness and intimacy. She appeared regularly on podcasts and television shows, using her YouTube channel to discuss topics that made others uncomfortable. Amy believed that openness and education could heal shame. She also volunteered with Pineapple Support, an organization that provided mental health services to people in the adult entertainment industry, a population often overlooked and stigmatized. To Amy, everyone deserved compassion and help, regardless of their profession or past. Friends described her as a positive force, someone who lit up every room she entered. She was passionate, unapologetically herself, and committed to making the world better for women who had survived what she had survived. But there was something in Amy's past, something that would follow her for years, waiting in the shadows, growing more dangerous with each passing day. In 2009, Amy met a man named Gareth Pershouse at a Hollywood party. He was working as a nightlife photographer, capturing images of beautiful people at exclusive events. He was tall, 6 feet 4 inches, loud, fun, and smiley. He had a presence that commanded attention. Amy was working as a hostess at the party, still putting herself through school. When Gareth saw her, he was captivated. He took photograph after photograph of her, more than he took of anyone else. It was clear from the start that he was taken by her. They began dating, and before long they were living together. But the relationship that started with laughter and photographs quickly turned dark. Gareth was possessive. He wanted to know where Amy was at all times. Who was she with? What was she doing? He constantly checked her phone. Friends noticed the red flags immediately. But Amy, like so many people in abusive relationships, didn't see them at first. The possessiveness escalated into violence. Gareth would choke her, he suffocated her, he punched her with a closed fist. He would push her from cars, slam her head against the ground, kick her, and he documented her injuries with photographs. Bruises, cuts, evidence of what was happening behind closed doors. On June 22, 2011, after Gareth pushed her from a car, injuring her back, Amy filed her first petition for a restraining order, but she didn't follow through with prosecution. It's a common pattern in domestic violence cases. Victims often feel trapped, afraid, or hope that things will change. But things didn't change, they got worse. In March of 2012, Gareth broke into Amy's apartment. He smashed 10 picture frames on her door and told her things will get worse. The next day, he returned and taped 4 dozen roses to her entrance. The classic abuser's apology, the cycle of violence and reconciliation that keeps victims trapped. This time, Amy followed through. On March 22, 2012, she obtained a restraining order against Gareth Pursehouse. The document detailed the pattern of abuse. The choking, the punching, the suffocation, the forced entry into her home, and the bloody nose from his roughness. Amy ended the relationship. She moved to a new apartment. She tried to start over, and for a while it seemed like it had worked. But within a month of obtaining the restraining order, Amy believed Gareth had broken into her new place. Picture frames were smashed. Her laptop was wiped clean. She went to the police, but without evidence there was nothing they could do. Still, Amy tried to move forward. She focused on her career. She helped other women escape situations just like the one she had survived. And for 8 years she managed to avoid Gareth Pursehouse. 8 years of peace. 8 years of building a life. 8 years of thinking maybe, just maybe, she was finally free. But Gareth never forgot about her. He never moved on. Friends of Amy would later say she occasionally referred to him as my stalker. She knew deep down that he was still out there, still thinking about her. And she was right. In the summer of 2017, at one of those glittering Hollywood parties where Amy had once worked as a hostess, she was now behind the bar, moonlighting to make extra money. That night, she met someone who would change her life in the best way possible. Drew Carey, the beloved comedian and host of The Price is Right, walked into the party. When he saw Amy, he was immediately struck by her intelligence, her warmth, her authenticity. They began talking, and Drew knew within weeks that he wanted to marry her. "Well, I met this great girl," Drew told his coworkers. "Her name's Amy. She's a PhD and she's a therapist. If this keeps going the way it's going, I'm going to marry her." Their first date was at Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. For Drew, who had never been married despite his fame and success, Amy was special. She was smart, funny, compassionate. She made him feel like he could open up completely and be himself. For Amy, Drew represented stability and genuine love. He appreciated her mind, her work, her passion for helping others. He saw all of her and loved her anyway. In January 2018, Drew proposed, and Amy said yes. On Valentine's Day 2018, Drew introduced Amy to the world during a special episode of The Price is Right. Millions of viewers watched as Drew announced his engagement to this beautiful therapist. It should have been a fairy tale moment, but fairy tales don't exist in the real world. And that public announcement had consequences Amy hadn't anticipated. Every time there was a headline about Amy and Drew, every time they appeared in photographs together, Amy worried. She suspected that Gareth was seeing these images, reading these articles, and that each one was triggering something dark inside him. "I wish you weren't famous," Amy would tell Drew. "This is all because I'm dating you." Drew's career demanded travel, long hours on set, and constant public appearances. Amy found herself staying alone at Drew's house when he was away. One time she called the police to report trespassing on the property. The pressure of fame, the fear of Gareth, and the challenges of blending their very different lives began to take their toll. Despite trying couples therapy, despite their genuine love for each other, Drew and Amy ended their engagement in late 2018. Friends described the breakup as amicable. They still loved each other, but sometimes love isn't enough to overcome circumstance. They fell out of touch after that. Drew began a new relationship. Amy focused on her practice and her friends. Life moved forward, as it always does. But on February 13th, 2020, the night before Valentine's Day, Drew received a text message he hadn't expected. It was from Amy. "I would love to get together with you and talk," she wrote. Drew's heart leaped. "Yeah, I would love to do that," he texted back. "I love you." They never got that chance. On January 16th, 2020, Amy attended the XBiz Awards, an adult entertainment industry awards ceremony. She was there on behalf of Pineapple Support, the mental health organization she volunteered with. It was supposed to be a professional event, a chance to advocate for the people she cared about. Gareth Pursehouse was there too. He was working as a red carpet photographer. They hadn't seen each other in 8 years. 8 years since the restraining order. 8 years since Amy had escaped. Amy was with her friend and fellow therapist when Gareth approached. He came up behind her and started screaming. "Why are you here? Why are you here?" He was sobbing. His head was in his hands. He was hyperventilating, distorting his face, shaking violently. The emotional breakdown was so extreme that people around them stopped and stared. Amy, falling back on her training as a therapist, went into what she would later call therapist mode. She tried to calm him down. She talked with him for almost an hour, trying to de-escalate the situation, trying to help him despite her fear. But during that conversation, Gareth revealed something terrifying. He couldn't stop obsessing over her. He told her. He recited text messages she had sent 9 years ago, word for word. He remembered the exact dates, the people she had sent them to. Every single detail. 9 years of obsession. 9 years of thinking about her every day. He called her names. He sobbed and accused her of ruining his life. He was angry, bitter, and completely fixated on her. When Amy finally left the awards ceremony that night, she was shaken to her core. She immediately called her mother, Penny. "Mom, I'm so scared," she told her. "He's been obsessed with me for 9 years. He thinks about me every day." That same night, Amy sat down and wrote an email to herself. It was the kind of thing many people do when they need to process something traumatic, to have a record of what happened in case something goes wrong. "Tonight I felt very scared," she wrote. "He couldn't stop obsessing over me." He recited text messages that I had sent about 9 years ago, recited the date, who they were to, and exactly what they said word for word. I couldn't believe it. I was very scared. I'm pretty nervous that I'm more on his radar now. He's focused on harming me. I'm hoping that this interaction and listening and giving him time may cause a neutralization in his anger towards me. But then she wrote something even more chilling. "It terrifies me that he's been obsessed with me for 9 years. Thinks about me every day." Amy knew she was in danger. She called security companies to upgrade the alarm system at her Hollywood Hills home. She bought pepper spray. She began sharing her phone's location with her best friend Robert Koshland, so someone would always know where she was. She told Robert, "If anything happens to me, it's him. It's Gareth." The restraining order had expired years ago, because Gareth hadn't made an explicit threat at the awards ceremony. Amy didn't think the police would help, so she did what she could. She prepared, she stayed vigilant, and she hoped that maybe Gareth would finally leave her alone. But hope is not a strategy against obsession, and Gareth Pursehouse had been planning something terrible. February 14th, 2020, Valentine's Day. A day meant for love, for celebration, for romance. Amy spent that day hiking with her friend Cleopatra Slow, enjoying the California sunshine. Later that evening, she attended a burlesque show at the Globe Theater with several friends. Her friend Miss Tosh had organized the event. A celebration for everyone, single, coupled, happy, or heartbroken. Amy wore a rosary beaded necklace that night. She was laughing, taking pictures, cheering on the performers. After the show, she and her friends skipped the after party and went to the Nomad for tea, talking and enjoying each other's company. Around midnight, Amy headed home to her house in the Hollywood Hills at 2000 Mound Street. She lived in a charming 3-story home with a roommate, Michael Herman, who occupied the ground floor. Amy's bedroom was on the 3rd floor. with a balcony that overlooked the courtyard below. But while Amy had been out with friends that evening, someone had been inside her home, waiting. Around 10:30 p.m., while Amy was still at the burlesque show, Michael Herman had been awakened by what sounded like a plate smashing on the floor above him. Thinking it was just Amy, he fell back asleep. But it wasn't Amy. It was Gareth Pursehouse, breaking in through the French doors, shattering a glass panel to reach inside and unlock them. Once inside, he began his wait. Investigators would later theorize that Gareth waited for hours in that house, hidden in the darkness, preparing for what he planned to do. On the balcony, he placed a syringe filled with liquid nicotine, a lethal dose of poison that can kill someone, and might not be detected unless specifically tested for. He was methodical. He was patient. And he was angry. When Amy finally came home, she had no idea what was waiting for her. She likely went up to her third-floor bedroom, perhaps thinking about the fun night she just had with friends, perhaps thinking about Drew's text message, and their plans to meet up soon. Around 1:09 a.m. on February 15th, Michael Herman was jolted awake by a blood-curdling scream. It was Amy, and she was terrified. He could hear bodies slamming against the floor above him. Sounds of a violent struggle. Michael jumped out of bed and yelled up the stairs, hoping to scare off the intruder. But the sounds continued. Unable to find his phone in the dark, Michael made the agonizing decision to leave ME and run for help. He scaled a fence and ran to a neighbor's door, pounding on it repeatedly. No one answered. He ran across the street to another house. Again, no answer. Finally, he spotted someone walking on the street with a cell phone. "Call 911, he shouted. "Someone's attacking my roommate." The call came in at 1:11 a.m. Police were dispatched immediately to the home on Mound Street. When officers arrived, they found Michael Herman in the street, frantic. He led them around to the courtyard behind the house. There, lying on the ground beneath the third-floor balcony, was Amy Harwick. She had fallen 20 feet. Her body was broken. There were deep marks on her neck, signs of strangulation. She was barely clinging to life. Officers rushed inside the house. The scene told a horrific story. There was blood on the French doors. A trail of rosary beads led from the TV room through the bedroom and out onto the balcony. The necklace Amy had worn that night, torn from her neck during the struggle. On the balcony, officers found the syringe filled with yellowish-brown liquid. At first, they thought it might be heroin, but Detective Scott Masterson knew better. The syringe was sent to the FBI for testing. Months later, the results came back. It contained a lethal dose of liquid nicotine. Gareth had brought poison to murder Amy. Amy was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where doctors fought to save her life, but her injuries were too severe. At 3:26 a.m., Dr. Amy Harwick was pronounced dead. She was 38 years old. The cause of death was blunt force injuries to the head and torso from the fall, but the medical examiner also noted evidence of manual strangulation, defensive wounds on her hands and arms, and bruising on her neck. Amy had fought for her life with everything she had, but she had been up against someone much bigger, much stronger, and consumed by rage. When police interviewed Michael Herman at the scene, he told them about Amy's ex-boyfriend, the one she'd had a restraining order against. He couldn't remember the name, but he knew Amy's friend Robert would. Robert Koechlin rushed to the police station. When detectives asked him if he knew who might have done this, he didn't hesitate. "Yeah, Gareth," he said. "Gareth Pursehouse. You need to go find this guy right away." Detectives immediately began pulling up Gareth's information. They learned about the restraining orders from 2011 and 2012. They read the police reports detailing years of abuse. They learned about the encounter at the awards ceremony just 1 month earlier. They obtained Amy's email, the one she had written to herself after seeing Gareth at the X-Biz Awards. The email that would later be described by Detective Masterson as the closest we've ever had to a victim testifying in their murder. Within 13 hours of Amy's death, police descended on Gareth Purshouse's beachside home in Playa del Rey. Officers activated their body cameras as they approached. Gareth answered the door, playing innocent. "What's this about?" he asked. "Why do you want to talk?" "Oh yeah, I know Amy." "Sure." But the evidence was written all over his body. He had a black eye. There were scratches on his neck, chest, and arms. On his inner bicep was what appeared to be a bite mark. Evidence of Amy's desperate fight for survival. To us, it was indicative of Amy fighting for her life, prosecutor Victor Avila would later say. But she was obviously up against a much bigger, stronger opponent. Gareth claimed he'd been at home doing renovations. He said the black eye was from a home improvement project gone wrong, but detectives weren't buying it. Gareth Pursehouse was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder and 1 count of first-degree residential burglary, with the special circumstance allegation of lying in wait, meaning he could be eligible for the death penalty. He was initially released on a $2 million bond a few days later, but then something happened that sent investigators back into action. Jane's Addiction guitarist Dave Navarro, who was friends with Amy, contacted police with a chilling warning. He had received information that Gareth might be planning to target another victim. Gareth was rearrested 4 days after his release on a no-bail warrant. He would remain in custody, awaiting trial for the next 3.5 years. The trial was delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting court backlog. For years, Amy's family and friends waited for justice, carrying their grief and anger with no resolution. Drew Carey, devastated by Amy's death, struggled to move forward. "I just started crying," he told reporters. "I couldn't even stand up." He forgave Gareth, believing him to be mentally ill, but he still wanted justice for Amy. Finally, on August 29, 2023, more than 3 years after Amy's murder, Gareth Purshouse's trial began in a Los Angeles courtroom. Judge George G. Lomoli presided over the case. The prosecution, led by Deputy District Attorney Victor Avila, painted a picture of a man consumed by obsession. They argued that the encounter at the X-Bays Awards had reignited Gareth's fixation on Amy. They presented evidence showing that Gareth had broken into her home, waited for hours, then attacked her when she returned. He strangled her, lifted her up over the balcony, and dropped her to her death. Avila told the jury, "The prosecution introduced the syringe filled with nicotine as evidence of premeditation. That does not just happen out of nowhere," Avila argued. "He has to go get that. He has to go obtain that. It's a poison that, if you inject it into someone, it may not be detected unless they're looking for it." They showed surveillance footage from a neighbor's Ring camera that captured someone landing in the yard on the night of February 15th. Someone fleeing the scene. DNA evidence recovered from the French door, and living room floor matched Gareth's DNA. The broken rosary beads told the story of Amy's desperate struggle through her home, from the TV room to the bedroom to the balcony. And then there was Amy's email, her own words, written a month before her death, describing her fear and Gareth's obsession. This email was written by Amy. Prosecutor Catherine Mariano told the jury during closing arguments. Not only does it talk about her fear, but it talks about just how angry, not desperate, angry the defendant was. It was, as Detective Masterson said, the closest thing to a victim testifying at their own murder trial. The defense, led by attorneys Evan Franzel and Robin Bernstein-Lev, admitted that Gareth had broken into Amy's home, but they argued he never intended to kill her, only to talk to her. They claimed that the encounter at the X-Biz Awards had sent Gareth into a deep, debilitating depression, and that the only way out was to speak with Amy one final time. His only intention that night was to speak to her, Franzel told the jury. During closing arguments, the defense presented a new theory. Perhaps Amy had attacked Gareth first. "We don't know who initiated the physical confrontation," Bernstein-Lev argued. They suggested that Amy might have gone out onto the balcony herself and tried to climb over it to escape. Pointing to an old photograph of Amy posing on the balcony as evidence this was possible. As for the syringe of nicotine, the defense claimed Gareth had brought it to kill himself, not Amy. They pointed to the fact that he'd been placed on suicide watch after his arrest. But the prosecution's rebuttal was powerful. "He didn't go there to talk," Avila said. "He's on a mission. He's angry. He feels rejected." After nearly 8 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the jury reached a verdict. On September 28, 2023, Gareth Pursehouse was found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree residential burglary. The jury also found true the special circumstance allegation of lying in wait. Amy's friends wept in the courtroom. "It's just been a long time coming," said Rudy Torres. Robert Koshland added, "There's never closure in situations like this, but at least justice was served today." On December 6, 2023, Judge Lomeli sentenced Gareth Pursehouse to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At 45 years old, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Today, justice has been served for Amy Harwick and her loved ones who have endured unimaginable pain throughout this terrible ordeal, said Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon. Prosecutor Catherine Mariano offered her theory about why Gareth chose Valentine's Day for the murder. I think Gareth decided to kill Amy Harwick on a day that symbolized love and couples, and I think it was poetic justice in his opinion. He had destroyed something beautiful on a day meant to celebrate love, but in doing so, he had destroyed his own life as well. In the aftermath of Amy's death, her family, friends, and former fiancé struggled to make sense of the senseless. Drew Carey kept photographs of Amy in his home. "I think about her every day," he said. "It's such a loss." He admitted that Amy's death had changed his view on love and relationships. "It destroyed me for a while. I still don't date," he said years later. Amy's death really affected everything. But out of tragedy came a determination to honor Amy's memory by continuing her work. Her family requested that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to Rock to Recovery, an organization that focuses on the healing power of music for people dealing with addiction, trauma, and mental health issues. A Change.org petition called Justice for Amy garnered nearly 25,000 signatures demanding reforms to California's domestic violence laws. The petition called for the elimination of restraining order expiration dates, mandatory long-term counseling for abusers, accommodations for witnesses who fear testifying near their abusers, and a registry for known perpetrators of domestic violence. Amy's story became a rallying cry for awareness about intimate partner violence. Drew Carey spoke publicly about the issue, saying, "You can't be a person in this country and not know a woman who hasn't been a victim of domestic violence. You just can't. And it's really a problem that not enough people acknowledge." Amy's clients and friends remembered her dedication to helping others. "Her work changed my life," tweeted model Emily Sears. "It's truly heartbreaking that she passionately dedicated her life helping others heal from trauma and live freely. This shouldn't have happened to her," producer Kelsey Daria wrote. "We spoke in detail about my past history with domestic abuse. She dedicated her life to helping women like me." Emmy's mother Penny and father Tom tried to find peace knowing that their daughter had lived life on her own terms, helping countless people along the way. She had been quirky, brilliant, compassionate, and fearless. She had loved horror movies and collected taxidermy. But she had also created safe spaces for people society often judged or overlooked. She had worked with sex workers, survivors of abuse, people struggling with shame and self-acceptance. She had published books, appeared on television, and used her voice to educate and heal. She had been engaged to one of the most famous television hosts in America, but she had also been a woman who bartended at parties and never forgot where she came from. And she had been afraid, rightfully afraid, of a man who couldn't accept that she didn't belong to him. As we close this story, take a moment to reflect on the warning signs that were there all along. The possessiveness, the violence, the refusal to accept that a relationship was over, the obsession that lasted 9 years. 9 years of remembering text messages word for word. 9 years of thinking about someone every single day. 9 years of rage building and building until it exploded on Valentine's Day 2020. Amy Harwick did everything she was supposed to do. She obtained restraining orders. She moved to a new apartment. She tried to avoid places where she might see her abuser. She documented the abuse with photographs and police reports. When she encountered Gareth at the awards ceremony, she tried to de-escalate the situation by listening to him and being compassionate. She upgraded her security system, bought pepper spray, and shared her location with friends. She wrote an email to herself documenting her fear. She told her closest friend, "If anything happens to me, it's him." And still it wasn't enough. Because the truth is, when someone is determined to harm you, when obsession overrides reason, when rage becomes all-consuming, no amount of preparation can guarantee your safety. The restraining orders expired. The police couldn't act without explicit threats. The security system wasn't enough. And on a night that was supposed to celebrate love, a man who had never stopped obsessing over a woman he dated a decade earlier made a choice that ended 2 lives, hers literally and his functionally. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, remember Dr. Amy Harwick. Remember the therapist who helped others heal. Remember the author who educated women about sexuality and self-acceptance. Remember the advocate who fought for sex workers and abuse survivors. Remember the friend who offered hugs to strangers crying in bathrooms. Remember the fiancé who inspired love in others. And if you or someone you know is in a relationship marked by possessiveness, jealousy, violence, or control, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799. Because Amy's story reminds us that domestic violence doesn't end when relationships end. Sometimes it's only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Rest in peace, Dr. Amy Harwick. May your legacy of healing and helping others continue long after your tragic death. And may your story serve as a reminder that we must do better to protect survivors of domestic violence before it's too late. Please, if you're still awake, let's move on to our last story. Story 5. Tonight, let me take you to South Africa in the year 2005, to the picturesque university town of Stellenbosch, where vineyard-covered hills meet cobblestone streets, and where ancient oak trees line avenues filled with students cycling to class. It's a place that feels safe, privileged, almost frozen in time. But on one Wednesday in March, something would happen that would shatter that illusion forever, setting off a chain of events that 2 decades later still haunts everyone involved. This is the story of Inge Lotz. A story about a brilliant young woman whose life ended violently, about evidence that seemed damning but fell apart under scrutiny, about a confession that was ignored, and about a justice system that failed everyone it was supposed to protect. Inge Lotz was, by all accounts, extraordinary. 22 years old in the spring of 2005, she was the only child of Professor John Lotz, a radiologist, and his wife Juanita, a physiotherapist. They lived in Welgemoot, a suburb of Cape Town, and Inge was, as they called her, their sunshine child, their angel, the apple of their eye. These weren't just the usual proud parent platitudes. Inge had been one of the top 10 students in the entire Western Province when she graduated high school. She was a soloist in the choir of a prominent Dutch Reformed church congregation, her voice reportedly capable of filling the sanctuary with ethereal beauty. She excelled at piano, and now, in 2005, she was pursuing a master's degree in actuarial science at Stellenbosch University, one of the most demanding programs imaginable, requiring both mathematical brilliance and analytical precision. But Inge wasn't just academically gifted. She was cautious, careful, some might even say vigilant about her safety, in a country where the murder rate was, and remains, among the highest in the world. About 33 murders per 100,000 people, compared to a global average of 6. Inge took precautions. She'd specifically chosen her apartment in the Shiraz complex in the Welgevonden estate because of its high security features, tall walls, electric wire, a remote-controlled gate. She'd even waited to move in until the security gate was fully installed. In November 2004, about 4 months before her death, Inge had started dating a fellow student named Frederick van der Vyver. Everyone called him Fred. He was tall, handsome, intelligent, quietly confident, from a wealthy farming family in the Eastern Cape. Fred had attended Grey College in Bloemfontein, played rugby, and was now working as an actuarial assistant at Old Mutual, one of South Africa's largest financial services companies, while continuing his studies. They made what everyone described as a striking couple. Both deeply religious, both ambitious, both from prominent Afrikaans families. When they weren't together, they exchanged love letters and text messages. Inge had already begun preparing her parents for an engagement that everyone assumed was coming soon. Everything about Inge's life seemed nearly perfect, which is what made what happened next so incomprehensible. Wednesday, March 16, 2005, began like any other day. The morning was hot and humid, typical for that time of year in the Cape. Fred had spent the night at Inge's apartment, as he did every Tuesday. They had breakfast together. At around 8:15 in the morning, Fred left for a class at the university. They parted with hugs and kisses. What Fred didn't know, what no one knew at the time, was that Inge had been crying that morning. There had been some disagreement between them. Something in a letter Inge had written to Fred. Later, this letter would take on enormous significance, with police suggesting it provided a motive, but in that moment, Fred simply left for class, then drove to his job at Old Mutual in Cape Town, about an hour away. Journée spent the day at home. At 3:15 that afternoon, she went to a local video store and rented a DVD, The Stepford Wives, the 2004 remake starring Nicole Kidman. She returned to her apartment And then sometime that afternoon, someone entered Inge's apartment. What happened next was brutal beyond description. The attack was savage. Inge was bludgeoned repeatedly with a blunt object. 13 blows to her head, face, and right hand. The force was so extreme that her skull was fractured in multiple places. But her attacker wasn't finished. Inge was also stabbed 20 times in the neck. Her chest appeared to have been gouged. When it was over, Inge's body was left on the couch in her living room. Still wearing her nightgown, a magazine was nearby, suggesting she'd been reading when the attack began. From the doorway, it looked almost like she was sleeping. Her brown hair tumbled over the arm of the couch. It was only from closer that the full horror became apparent. There was blood everywhere, on the couch, on the floor, in the bathroom where the killer had apparently cleaned up afterward. But here's what was strange. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen. Inge had not been sexually assaulted. The apartment's security had not been breached. As the afternoon turned to evening, Fred became concerned. He couldn't reach Inge on her phone. He called her mother, Juanita, asking if she'd heard from Inge. He expressed worry to his flatmate, Marius Botha. Finally, that evening, Fred drove to Welgemod to pick up Inge's remote control from her parents' house. He asked Juanita if she wanted to go with him to check on Inge. She stayed home, waiting for news. It was Christo Pretorius, a church friend of Marius Botha, who actually entered the apartment first at 10:36 p.m. What he found sent him running outside in shock. By the time Fred arrived moments later, he already knew. Marius told him the words that would echo in his mind for years to come. Inge is dead. She was murdered. When police arrived at apartment 21 in the Shiraz complex that night, they found a crime scene that was both brutal and baffling. The excessive force, the multiple stab wounds, the personal nature of the attack, all suggested someone who knew End. Someone close to her. This wasn't a stranger killing. At least that's what investigators believed. The lead investigator was Dion de Villiers. Under pressure to solve a high-profile murder in a wealthy, white area, always a recipe for intense scrutiny in South Africa, de Villiers and his team began collecting evidence. The forensic photographer captured everything in a 23-minute video that would later be played in court, showing the horror in clinical detail. Dr. Rachel Adendorf, the district surgeon who performed the autopsy 2 days after the murder, made an observation that would become crucial. She suggested to police that they look for a hammer. The wounds, she noted, were consistent with that type of weapon. Police began their investigation with what seemed like an obvious suspect, Fred van der Vyver. He was Inge's boyfriend. He had access to her apartment. He knew her security arrangements. And investigators discovered what they believed were 3 pieces of damning evidence. First, Fred's fingerprint. Police claimed they found his fingerprint on the DVD case of The Stepford Wives, the movie Inge had rented at 3:15 p.m. on the day of her death. This was supposedly proof that Fred had been in the apartment after he'd claimed to have left that morning. Second, a bloody shoe print in Inge's bathroom, where the killer had apparently cleaned up. Police found a blood mark on the floor. They claimed it matched the sole of one of Fred's shoes. Third, the hammer. A month after the murder, when police searched Fred's Backy, his pickup truck, they found an ornamental hammer under the driver's seat. It wasn't a regular carpenter's hammer, but a decorative piece with a bottle opener instead of a claw. And here's the detail that made it seem even more damning. The hammer had been a Christmas gift from Inge's parents to Fred in December 2000. When forensic experts tested the hammer, they found what appeared to be blood traces, though not visible to the naked eye. The shape and size of the hammer seemed to match Inge's wounds. On June 10, 2005, nearly 3 months after Inge's death, Fred van der Vyver was arrested and charged with her murder. The case seemed watertight. The evidence appeared overwhelming. Fred's behavior after the murder had struck some as strange. He'd moved into Inge's room at her parents' house the day after her death, sleeping on the floor, setting up his computer there, lighting a candle. He'd said to Juanita, "I'll become the child in the house. I'll move into the back room. I'll study at her desk." To some, this seemed like grief. To others, it seemed suspicious. But there was something else. Something the police knew about but decided to pursue differently. 6 weeks after Inge's murder, on April 19, 2005, Investigator Dion de Villiers received information that would complicate everything. A man named Werner Carolus, living in Springbok in the Northern Cape, had confessed to being involved in Ingi Lotz's murder. Werner Carolus was a drug addict, a tick cop, as they called methamphetamine users in South Africa. He was barely out of his teens, but already had a lengthy criminal record. 29 charges for housebreaking by 205. He was exactly the kind of person the police might have expected to commit a violent crime during a burglary gone wrong. Carolus told police he'd been involved in the murder of a young woman who regularly bought drugs from us. He said they'd followed her. When police brought him from Springbok to Stellenbosch for questioning, Carolus was able to point out the Shiraz complex in Welgavenden. He could identify the complex, though not the specific apartment. But here's what made his confession potentially significant. His original statement, made in Springbok, contained details about the murder scene that he shouldn't have known if he hadn't been there. Details that hadn't been released to the public. Carolus didn't just confess to his own involvement. He implicated 5 other people, including a woman named Eleanor. He claimed there had been a drug deal that went wrong. The police brought him to the scene for what's called a pointing out exercise, where a suspect physically shows investigators what happened. During these exercises, Carolus led police to a house in Clodesville, a township adjacent to the Welgavenden estate. There, police confiscated a knife, a pair of scissors, and a remote control to a gate. The knife, when tested, showed traces of blood from another possible suspect. This should have been a major breakthrough, but investigator de Villiers concluded, after interviewing everyone Carolus implicated, that there was no connection between Carolus' story and Ingi's murder. Here's where things get murky. Carolus later retracted his confession. Then he confessed again. Then he retracted again. He claimed he'd made the whole thing up to get revenge on people who'd sold him drugs. On July 20, 2005, he made a formal statement admitting he'd lied about everything. It was a lie from Okiep to Cape, as one report described it. But there were problems with dismissing Carolus so easily. First, his cell phone records showed he was in the Northern Cape at the time of Ingi's murder, which would seem to rule him out. But then again, if he'd been part of a group that committed the crime, he wouldn't have needed to be physically present. Second, and more troubling, there were allegations that Carolus had been pressured to retract his confession by Adi Trolip, the officer in charge of the murder investigation. Trolip was a former member of the security police, familiar with what some delicately called persuasive ways. By the time Carolus recanted, Trolip already had Fred van der Vyver's supposed fingerprint on the DVD case, and was building a case against him. Think about it from the police perspective. Werner Carolus was a drug addict with a criminal record. Fred van der Vyver was a wealthy, educated white man from a prominent family. If Carolus and his associates had killed Ingi, it raised uncomfortable questions. Why would an aspiring actuary from a conservative Christian family know drug dealers? Had Ingi been buying drugs? What else about her life didn't match the perfect image everyone had? Fred van der Vyver was perhaps the more convenient suspect. Years later, in 2008, a top detective named Piet Viljoen was asked to investigate whether Carolus should be charged with defeating the ends of justice for wasting police time. What Viljoen found was startling. In his report, he wrote, "My personal opinion once again is that Werner Carolus was never properly investigated to see if he has anything to do with this murder." Later in the same report, the writer of this information note feels that an investigator should be appointed to investigate the Lotz murder in full and to see if Werner Carolus is not involved in the murder. Viljoen's recommendation was clear. Don't investigate Carolus for lying to police. Investigate him for the murder. But by then, Fred van der Vyver was already on trial. The trial of Fred van der Vyver began in February 2007 in the Western Cape High Court in Cape Town. Judge Dion van Zyl presided. It would last 9 months, what Judge van Zyl himself would later describe as long and emotion-packed. The state's case rested on those 3 pillars: the fingerprint, the shoe print, and the hammer. Prosecutor Corinne Finunison presented what seemed like devastating evidence. But Fred's family had resources. His parents, Louis and Carrion van der Vyver, eventually sold their family farm to pay for his defense, which cost approximately 10 million rand, about $1 million. They hired advocate Duke de Bruyn, SC, one of South Africa's top defense attorneys, who would later represent Riva Steenkamp's family in the Oscar Pistorius trial. And crucially, they brought in international experts to examine the prosecution's evidence. The fingerprint was analyzed by a forensic expert who had helped take down O.J. Simpson and had spotted forged Jackson Pollock paintings worth millions. His conclusion: the fingerprint wasn't lifted from the DVD case at all. It had been lifted from a drinking glass. There was a smudge at the top of the print that defense experts claimed was a lip print. Evidence that the print came from a glass Fred had handled at some earlier time, not from the DVD case. The shoe print in the bathroom was examined by Bill Bodziak, an internationally renowned shoe print expert who had flown from the United States to testify. His conclusion contradicted the police completely. The blood mark on Ingie's bathroom floor, he said, was not made by Fred Vanderwever's shoe, not even close. This was particularly damaging because it emerged that the police expert, Captain Bart Bartholomew, had claimed to consult with Bodziak and said Bodziak agreed with his conclusion. When Bodziak heard this, he contacted the prosecution to say it wasn't true. Bartholomew had misrepresented his position. The state prosecutors knew this, yet they persisted with Bartholomew's original testimony anyway. The hammer evidence also fell apart. While the hammer found in Fred's truck did test positive for blood traces, the results were inconclusive. The hammer couldn't be definitively linked to Ingie's wounds. And Fred's explanation that the hammer had been under his seat since December, and he'd simply forgotten about it, was plausible if not particularly convincing. More importantly, Fred had an alibi. He'd been at work at Old Mutual during the crucial hours, when Inge was killed. His colleagues confirmed this. Cell phone records supported it. The timeline didn't work for him to have committed the murder. The defense reopened its case to let Fred testify in his own defense, an unusual move after closing arguments had already begun. For several emotional days, Fred took the stand. He denied everything. He described his relationship with Inge as loving, said they were planning to get engaged, explained his grief and confusion after her death. I was very much in love with her, he told the court. When asked directly if he'd killed Inge, Judge Van Zyl interrupted the question. He has already said he didn't murder her, the judge noted, and a ripple of laughter went through the court despite the gravity of the proceedings. On November 8, 2007, Judge Dion Van Zyl delivered his verdict. Fred Vanderwever was not guilty. In his judgment, Van Zyl was scathing about the state's case. He rejected the evidence about the bloodstain, the hammer, and the fingerprint. The evidence, he said, was so weak that the case should never have been brought to court. Fred could not have killed Inez. Fred did not kill Inez. Fred had lost a quarter of his body weight during the trial. He walked out of court a free man, but vindication in a courtroom doesn't erase public suspicion. Judge Van Zyl was careful in his judgment. While he found the evidence inadequate, he refused to find that police had deliberately fabricated evidence. He left open the possibility that this was a case of negligence and utter incompetence rather than malicious prosecution. Fred's legal team wasn't satisfied with that. In 2008, Fred sued the government for 46 million rand in damages, claiming malicious prosecution. The civil case was a different battlefield. Here, the question wasn't whether Fred had killed Inge, but whether the police had knowingly lied about the evidence against him. In 2011, Judge Anton Veldhuizen heard Fred's claim for damages. His ruling was stark and unambiguous. Some police officers had knowingly lied about the evidence. If they hadn't done so, Fred would never have been prosecuted. Judge Veldhuizen found in Fred's favor, awarding him damages. It was complete vindication. 6 years of unremitting struggle for Fred, for his parents who'd sold their farm, for the lawyers who'd fought the case. But the state appealed. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court of Appeal, where Judge Fritz Brand came to a different conclusion. Brand held that even without Bartholomew's discredited testimony about the shoe print, the prosecutor had testified that he would have continued with the prosecution anyway. Therefore, there wasn't sufficient causal link to prove malicious prosecution. Fred's team appealed to the Constitutional Court, South Africa's highest court. The Constitutional Court dismissed his application in a mere 2 weeks, without providing detailed reasons. Legal scholars were puzzled. How could such a closely reasoned and legally complex application be dismissed so quickly? Some speculated that language played a role. The original trial judgment was in Afrikaans, and translation issues may have worked against Fred. Others wondered if the court had simply decided it wasn't worth revisiting. Fred eventually lost his civil case. The family that had spent everything defending him got nothing back. Meanwhile, Inji's parents were living their own nightmare. Professor Jan and Juanita Lotz sued Fred for 4 million rand each in a civil suit. They genuinely believed he'd killed their daughter. They offered a 1 million rand reward for information about Inji's murder. They hired Master Detective Piet Bijleveld to investigate, though they later terminated his mandate. In 2016, 11 years after Inji's death, Professor Jan Lotz even asked the National Director of Public Prosecutions to reopen the murder case against Fred after a physicist claimed Fred's fingerprint had indeed been lifted from a flat surface, supporting the prosecution's original theory. Nothing came of it. Over the years, the case has attracted obsessive attention from amateur investigators. Two brothers, Thomas and Calvin Mollitz, spent years conducting their own forensic analysis. Thomas, a copy editor with a degree in human movement science, became fascinated after reading Anthony Albaker's book about the case, Fruit of a Poison Tree. Thomas turned his apartment in Piekenburg into a makeshift crime lab. He bought a severed pig's head from the local butcher. He ordered an almost identical ornamental hammer from Canada. He and his brother conducted blood splatter tests, measured angles, consulted with experts. They even examined the blood-stained towel found at the scene, discovering what they claimed were clear imprints of the hammer. In 2014, the Mollett brothers published their own book, Bloody Lies, arguing that all the key elements of the prosecution's evidence actually withstood scrutiny. They contended that the hammer found in Fred's truck could match Inji's head wounds, that the fingerprint wasn't lifted from a glass, that blood marks on the towel came from the hammer, and that a closer look at cell phone records revealed a different sequence of movements than what was accepted by the court. The Mollets wanted the case against Fred reopened. The Western Cape Director of Public Prosecutions declined, admitting that 9 years later there were no new or other suspects. Meanwhile, a former detective named Alan D. Elston spent a decade investigating the case. In 2018, he published his own book, Broken and Betrayed, claiming he had discovered irrefutable evidence that at least 5 people had participated in Inji's carefully planned murder to cover up sins and disgrace of people close to her. According to Elston, senior members of the South African Police Service and the National Prosecuting Authority were involved in a massive cover-up from the beginning. He laid criminal charges against 5 police officers for perjury and charges of defeating the ends of justice against a retired police director and a senior NPA prosecutor. None of these charges resulted in prosecutions. The authorities, Elston claimed, were protecting the real killers. In 2021, nearly 17 years after Inji's death, News 24 produced a 6-part podcast series about the case. Producer Matthew Brown had spent almost a decade investigating, traveling to the United States to interview FBI agents and forensic experts. Brown and co-producer Catherine Rice interviewed Fred Vanderwyver on camera for the first time. Fred, by then in his late 30s, had moved on with his life as much as anyone could. "People around me believe in my innocence," he told the podcast producers. "I've made peace with how people view me." The podcast highlighted the failures of South Africa's criminal justice system: poor evidence gathering, collapsing forensic labs, incompetence, and an under-resourced police force. It examined Werner Carolus' confession in detail, questioning why it was so quickly dismissed. But it provided no definitive answers about who killed Inji Lotz. 20 years later, the murder of Inji Lotz remains unsolved. The case file was officially closed by the National Prosecuting Authority, an almost unheard-of decision for an unsolved murder, made apparently to shield the authorities from further embarrassment after the botched prosecution of Fred Vanderwyver. There are so many unanswered questions. If Fred didn't kill Inj, and the evidence suggests he didn't, then who did? Werner Carolus and his associates. A stranger, someone else entirely. Why was there no forced entry? Inji was extremely security conscious. She wouldn't have opened the door to just anyone. What about the construction workers? Inji's apartment complex was still under construction. Workers from QuickCon Construction were the last people known to have seen Inji alive at her flat. But the company was liquidated after the murder, and the temporary employees, many from Mozambique, returned home and were never traced by police. What about the anonymous threatening phone calls Inji had reportedly been receiving in the weeks before her murder? The calls were traced to a public phone booth near her apartment, but surveillance footage showed no clear suspects. The content of the calls was never revealed publicly. What about the dispute with a fellow student over a research project that had escalated to the point where Inge reported them to university authorities? That student was questioned but never charged. A forensic investigator later noted that police had compromised the crime scene by walking all over it, significantly reducing the chances that anyone would ever be prosecuted for Inge's death. The scene should have been holy, as Thomas Mollett put it. Instead, it was contaminated. And then there's the letter. The final letter Inge wrote to Fred on the morning of her death. Police believed it provided a motive, suggesting relationship problems. But we don't know what was in that letter. The details were never made public. Fred testified that there were unhappiness and unresolved issues between them that morning, but also that they'd parted with hugs and kisses, that he loved her deeply. One investigator, reflecting on the case years later, posed an uncomfortable question. Who exactly was Inge Lotz? Was there more to her life than appearances suggested? It's a question that cuts to the heart of why Werner Carolus' confession was so quickly dismissed. If Inge had been involved with people in the drug world, even peripherally, it would shatter the image of the perfect Christian student, the sunshine child, the golden girl, but without evidence, it remains pure speculation. And even raising the question feels like a violation of Inge's memory. Picture Stellenbosch today. The oak trees still line the streets. Students still cycle to class. The Shiraz complex in Welgevonden is still there, though apartment 21 has long since been occupied by other tenants who may not even know what happened there. Fred van der Vijver is now in his early 40s. He's rebuilt his life, though the shadow of suspicion never fully lifts in the court of public opinion. Inge's parents, Professor Jan and Juanita Lotz, have lived for 2 decades with the pain of their daughter's murder and the knowledge that her killer was never brought to justice. They'll never see Inge graduate, never walk her down the aisle, never meet grandchildren. Their sunshine child exists now only in photographs and memories. Werner Carolus is in prison, serving time for other crimes. Whether he knows what really happened to Inge Lotz, we may never know. And somewhere, someone knows the truth. Someone knows who entered Inge's apartment that March afternoon in 2005. Someone knows why she was beaten and stabbed with such rage. Someone knows who wielded that weapon, whether it was a hammer or something else. Someone knows who left that bloody crime scene and walked away, leaving a brilliant young woman dead on her couch. That person has lived with that knowledge for 20 years. They've gone to sleep every night knowing what they did. They've woken up every morning and gone about their lives while Inge's family has lived in perpetual grief. While Fred van der Vijver spent years fighting to clear his name. While South Africa's justice system revealed its profound failures for all to see. The case remains officially unsolved. Closed but not solved. There's a difference. It stands as one of South Africa's most perplexing cold cases. A story of violence, flawed investigations, disputed evidence. Ignored confessions, and ultimately no justice for anyone. Inge Lotz was 22 years old when she died. She should be 42 now. She should have had a career, a marriage, children, a full life. Instead, she's frozen forever at 22. Remembered primarily as a murder victim in a case that no one could solve. In South Africa, where 33 people are murdered per 100,000 every year, Inge's case is just one among thousands. But for those who knew her, for those who investigated her death, for those who've become obsessed with solving the mystery, it remains singular, haunting, unfinished. The truth is out there somewhere. Perhaps one day it will emerge. Perhaps someone will finally speak. Perhaps some piece of evidence, some testimony, some connection will finally bring answers. Until then, the murder of Inge Lotz remains what it has been for 20 years. A tragedy, a mystery, and a profound failure of justice. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime stories. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.